Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Istio User Experience Workgroup meeting. I wanted to start off by announcing that I have a PR for 1.8 for istioctl to use tokens rather than certificates to talk to XDS for the troubleshooting commands. This should eliminate all of the huge difficulties we had with security, the makefile to make certificate directories, and all those other problems we're having with 1.7. So I got some initial reviews. I totally redid the PR, and it's very quick. It goes and asks Kubernetes for a token, which takes a few milliseconds, and then it starts using it. And it recreates the token every time it runs. So it should totally hide all of the difficulties we have with 1.7 and the troubleshooting commands. So I invited Tariq here. Tariq, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Tariq, you may be on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, it's Tarek. Thanks for the invitation, Ed. Yeah.
Yes, so Tariq has been submitting some PRs recently. I do not know him. He's from MuleSoft and Salesforce, is that right?
Correct. Yes.
I'll just copy that off your GitHub page. Anyway, he found some problems with remove from mesh, and we merged them for 1.8. And he was thinking that we should merge them for 1.7. I thought we could take 5 or 10 minutes to look at this or hear from Tariq why we think this is important enough to get into 1.7.
Yep. I can explain my case if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah. Right now, since we enabled the app probe rewrite in Istio. So what Istio does is rewrites all the health check app probes whenever we inject the sidecar proxy. Now, when we want to remove all of the injections, that is, do the uninject, remove from mesh does not restore the app probes as it was. So it's kind of a blocker for us if we were to use add to mesh and remove from mesh.
Can you tell the group what your scenario is that requires you to remove from mesh? So you said you were not using CNI and you were using a bunch of different things than many of us use. I think it might be good to let people know.
So our setup is basically we use Istio in a different namespace, not Istio system. We have a control center of sorts, which has its own namespace. So we've kind of scoped Istio under that control center namespace, and we also use Istio CNI. That's our kind of different scenario. So, but I guess the main motivation behind add to mesh and remove from mesh is that I think that's our best way of limiting the pods that will be injected. Because if we were to enable Istio injection in namespace, then all of the workloads in that namespace would be injected with the Istio proxy. But we want to have a way where we can have a sort of opt-in to the Istio proxies. So add to mesh and remove from mesh seems to be our best shot at doing that.
So I approved these PRs because I thought that they were low risk, and now that they were going to be in 1.8, do we want to enable this for 1.7? I don't think it's going to affect anyone unless they're using remove from mesh. And if they're using remove from mesh, then it probably won't affect them unless they're using the special stuff that Tariq is talking about. Does anyone strongly object to me cherry picking this PR and also the related one to remove some volume mounts for 1.7.1?
So I have a question. So how did you restore the app probe as part of the remove to mesh, does Istio actually remember
Yes.
what the probe user use?
Yes, so Istio persists the original app probes as an environment variable. So it persists as a JSON under the Istio underscore cube app probers environment variable. So what I do is I just retrieve that back, I unmarshal it, and then I restore the original probes when
Okay.
removed from mesh.
Okay. I have another question. Why would you need to change the probe? I assume maybe your environment doesn't have the HTTP probe rewrite configuration enabled.
Yes, so we do have the probe rewrite configuration enabled when we do the Istio injection. So we're doing this because we want to enable MTLS all across the board. And for that, we would need to do the app probe rewrite.
Okay, so if you have this enabled by default, which is the default, by the way, since 1.6, then what are the reasons you would need to further customize the probe?
So I think my argument is that since Istio does this rewrite, it should do I think it falls under the scope of Istio to restore the probes once the Istio proxies are removed, once the uninjection is done.
Okay, yeah. I would assume that, right? Especially without the sidecar, because I thought the probe rewrite only works when you have the sidecar.
Yes. The rewrite is definitely happening once we inject the sidecar, but when I remove the sidecar, my expectation is for the old app probes to be restored. That does not happen.
I see. Okay, yeah. So this is definitely just fixing a bug. Makes sense to being a patch release.
Yes. So yes, I do consider this as a bug. Thanks.
Okay, unless anyone objects, I'm going to help Tarek create a cherry pick PR for 1.7.
I think that sounds good to me.
Excellent. Thank you for your hard work, Tariq, and I hope you consider making more contributions to Istio in the future.
Oh, for sure. Thank you.
And if you ever want to talk about how your organizations use Istio or the troubles you've had, and want to give feedback to the experience group, let me know and I can try to put you on the calendar.
For sure. Thank you. I appreciate that, Ed.
Excellent. So last week we were going through our analysis of all of the istioctl commands to see what we wanted to preserve and strengthen and what we wanted to remove. Last week we went through all of the non-experimental commands, and we had lots of strong opinions from Costin and John, who are not here. And we're going to go through this week the experimental commands. So for those of you who haven't looked at the experimental commands lately, I have a couple weeks ago made this list for this meeting, and I wanted to sort of talk about which ones we like and which ones we don't like to get a strong view of which ones to get rid of. Sort of mark in red the ones we want to get rid of, mark maybe in orange the ones that are candidates, mark in green's the one we want to approve or are new. So add to mesh. This is I wrote this command. It's a pretty good command for adding Istio without adding it to a namespace. Don't think it deserves a lot of talk. The authz command deserves discussion. First, we recently removed the convert piece from it, and the check piece, I wasn't able to find it, but we are trying to redo the authz check. It is not satisfying people. Istioctl config is brand new. Has everyone seen that command?
Yeah,
Let me-
just run it.
Let me just show it now. If you do config list, it gives these defaults, and these defaults are currently mostly used for the security features of Central STOD. And the goal is to take any features that people commonly use, such as Istio namespace, and put them in a config file similar to kubeconfig. So if anyone wants to talk about that or add more parameters to this, this should really help people who are either installing Istio in a custom namespace or are using this new XDS stuff.
So I guess I'm troubled to understand when would I use this command.
So this command actually is not very helpful because it only tells you sort of where the other commands are picking up their values. So recently, I wrote that documentation in our wiki about how to set up central STOD from the command line. And there, I know there's still some contention about the very first step, generating the certificates, which doesn't work in every environment yet. But the other instructions, the ones about how to use the system, sort of explain the motivation for why we did this. So if in my first version of the new subcommands, users had to enter explicitly every single time their STD endpoint, authority, and certificate dir, which was a huge problem because you obviously you didn't want to keep typing them in every single time you ran the commands. You would like to just be able to use the existing commands exactly with the same syntax, no arguments. So with Istio 1.7, it now looks in the istioctl, the .istioctl directory for a file. So let me, if I paste such instructions, it will make the file. I may already have it. If you rename this file config, it won't do anything as test config. If you rename this file as config, it will inject these options every single time you run istioctl. And the idea is that we will extend these with any popular options that people don't want to type. And then just like kube control, there'll be sort of defaults for the commands that will help it find things like, you know, if you've installed Istio in a non-standard directory, that kind of thing. We talked about having options to set the variables as well, but that seemed to be too risky. So Istio 1.7 just has the file to set them. So I like that feature, and I'm going to keep sort of working on it. I wanted to ask about create remote secret. Are we still using that command? I never create multi-clusters using this command.
Yeah, it's used in multi-cluster environment to give the primary cluster access to the remote cluster so that it can like read services and some of the gateway configuration, like the gateway and networking maps. Primarily for endpoint discovery, I would say. It's a primary purpose.
Does it deserve more attention?
I mean, it's been working fine.
Perfect. Well, then we can keep it. I just wanted to go through and see which commands deserve more or less attention. So kubectl describe is another troubleshooting command. We have a issue to restore TLS setting display and check. But I think that except for that issue, it's basically ready. Cube uninject is the command that Tarek was talking about earlier in the meeting. I wanted to point out that cube uninject has no docs other than itself. So we have remove from mesh and cube uninject. And if we want people to be sort of using either one, remove from mesh or cube uninject, we should probably work with the docs team to make some kind of guide or path about, or we could get rid of the command. What do people think?
I would vote for keeping it because it is kind of useful. When I was starting out with Istio, just trying to learn the ropes, I did use cube uninject during that time. So, and plus, remove from mesh and cube uninject shares a lot of logic. So I think it'd be useful to keep it.
Understanding how to use it or learn it, does it deserve documentation?
Yeah, I think it does deserve more documentation because I did have to look up the source code to understand a bit more.
Wow, that's interesting. I never thought you would look up source code for that. So basically, the inject, cube inject matches cube uninject, add to mesh, map to remove to mesh. I think they go like hand in hand. It doesn't make sense to remove this one while keep the other one.
Yep, I agree.
So the next command is metrics. Metrics is basically terrible. It has no docs other than itself either. But we have good news, which is that there's now an issue from telemetry to approve that has an assigned person. And also someone else told me that they might be interested in helping with it. So anyone who wants a CLI way to read metrics for, scraping with scripts and using awk and things, please read and comment on this RFC from the telemetry group sort of before they start working. Otherwise, no one in this group has really been working on it, and I'm not going to do any documentation because we may be replacing it in 1.8 with this work coming out of the telemetry group. So the next command is multi-cluster. It has apply, describe, and generate. I have not used these, and when I did this 2 weeks ago, I couldn't find any documentation other than the command itself. Is there such documentation now? This thing showed up in 1.4.
I don't think so. I've never used this either. I think Jason might be introducing this, but I don't believe our documentation has been updated to use it.
Is this something that is worthy of working with the docs team to create documentation? Or is this something that we should deprecate? I don't like things in this middle ground with no documentation. That's just somebody's toy.
Yeah, and I think one of the key questions is, does this thing support multi-network? Because I remember at one point it doesn't support multi-network, which is why we never use it. I don't remember if it's added to support multi-network. I don't know who would be Jason's replacement on Google's side. Would that be Nathan? Would be a good person to ask.
Which Jason are we talking about?
Jason Young.
Yeah, we haven't really hired in terms of a backfill for that. Nathan is familiar with some of Jason's work. I'm familiar with some of it. I'm not familiar with this particular command. I might reach out to Jason and see if he has the context there.
Yeah, that would be great.
So I think the question is which of those features we want to keep and deprecate, really. I mean, if we don't find someone to maintain, maybe we can just...
I looked at it and I'm just like, well, it wants a mesh.yaml, but there's no examples of what that should look like. So I couldn't even really try the command without reading the source code.
So that's a good sign that probably we can kill it. Less is more and all that. Louis asked me to do some exercise to look at mesh config in general and see which fields are really used by users, which fields are used by operators, which fields are useless. And there is a very small number of fields that are really useful for users right now from the current estimation. So even the mesh config editable by users, it's debatable. And it's alpha, so we can probably get rid of it, of some of it.
Fair enough. If we do want to kill these things, we should kill them soon and then see on testing day if anybody tells them that they needed them for some scenario we're unaware of.
Absolutely.
So the next command is post install webhook. Now this showed up in 1.4 as well. I think it was used for some 1.4 specific installation thing. I have never used it, and there are no examples, and it may no longer be needed.
It's no longer needed. We did some stuff in a post-install webhook. I don't think we have any post-install webhook. It was some Citadel-specific stuff.
I feel like it's Helm-related stuff.
No. It was the stuff they used after install. They need to clean up some old secrets and do some crazy stuff. It's you can grab for post-install. Anyway, we're not using Helm anyway, so it wouldn't.
Okay.
It would work with istioctl. And with Helm 3, we definitely don't use post-install webhooks.
All right, I'm going to create an issue and tag it as good first issue to get some people to start contributing because it looks pretty easy to get rid of. Okay, the next one is pre-check.
I think people still using it. I've seen some blog posts to people using pre-check to just test out their environment compatibility.
And also, I guess does our install command call pre-check? It seems it would make sense to do that.
Yes, so we've talked about that, and I should add that. I have noticed when I tried to do an install with 1.8 a few days ago, and it told me I couldn't because I was on I think a 1.16 Kubernetes. I had to upgrade my Kubernetes, and then after I did that, I could no longer test that logic. Yes, it should be more understandable if install is doing all or some of pre-check.
Because one thing, I mean, if install does a pre-check, maybe pre-check doesn't deserve its own command. It could be an option within the install that instead of doing full install, you pre-check.
It's actually not. Definitely install should do pre-check, but I think it's reasonable to have a tool that is just pre-checking that everything is in good state in case you actually want to do the install through other means like Helm 3 or CI/CD or other systems. So I don't think the plan is to support Helm 3 and other mechanisms as well. So we cannot assume that people will always use istioctl apply.
Okay, if for that particular purpose, then it's definitely reasonable to keep pre-check and perhaps even graduate it
exactly.
out of experimental.
I agree. Then do we have a fix or kind of? We should probably have both a pre-check and kind of fix or prepare.
What would prepare do, Costin?
So right now, theoretically, istioctl apply is doing a pre-check, is supposed to be doing a pre-check, is doing any kind of release notes related changes. Like if we can automatically change some of the configs, and then it applies the YAML. In the case of CI/CD system, the last part applying the YAML will be outside of the control of istioctl. It will be done by CI/CD, but the admin periodically may need to do pre-check and fix to do whatever is necessary to get to fix deprecations and other things. And that can be done after the upgrade. So we deprecate stuff and say, hey, you have until the next release to do those steps because they're going away. And then after the upgrade, users will go and, whenever he's comfortable, do this fix, maybe by namespace or whatever, and then test it and then have 3 months or whatever to get the cluster ready for the next upgrade when the feature is going away. Does it make sense?
It does. How can I write that down, though?
That I don't know. I'm not good at that.
Okay.
But yeah.
So are you suggesting the prepare would be people would do? It wasn't clear to me that whether you are proposing Istio would automatically upgrade certain resources for the user because of maybe it's out of support, or would the mesh
kind of
do that?
So Lynn, we during Istio history we deprecated all kind of features like authentication v1, authentication v2, and all kind of other things, and we make some backward incompatible changes. In general, the policy has been that if we want to remove something, we deprecate it first, and in the next release we get rid of it completely, and maybe we won. But the problem is that during these 3 months where the feature is deprecated, the user can go and start fixing the deprecation. So upgrade for authentication v alpha 1 to beta 1, or do whatever necessary changes in their own config.
Right.
Right now, I think we are trying to do it at startup. So when we install, we are combining doing some fixes with installing. But if we decouple them, so we can say, for example, you have upgrade the authentication policy, for example. You can both do it namespace by namespace, and you are not coupling with the upgrade, especially for central IstioD or managed IstioD, or when again, you don't control exactly the upgrade cycle.
So that's a little overlap with the deprecation analyzer, right? The difference is deprecation analyzer just tells you
Yes.
you're in an older version, but this one we need to correct the version.
Yes, exactly.
Is that something we want to? So that kind of gives us, like, we probably need to kind of have a policy for that. Like, what's the oldest version that you can use this, right? Like, we can't say like in you use in 1.2 and we convert it for you. That's impossible.
No, of course, but usually the policy has been that, again, for every feature, even alpha, we have 3 months or some deprecation policy where we still support the feature and the user has a time. So independent of what versions they are running, for example, they run 1.7 and then they move to 1.8, but in 1.8 well, actually Mixer, for example. Mixer is something they have until 1.8 is released to get rid of.
Right. So are we thinking this be part of pre-check, or it's a separate command?
Separate. Pre-check is would probably combine the deprecation analyzer and pretty much anything else. And the other one will be, especially since we want to split admin versus, cluster admin versus namespace admin. And probably this check will be run by namespace admin because they will need to understand what the hell is going on in many cases.
Wait, but if they're running on namespace admin, then one namespace has the updated API, but the other one doesn't have the updated API, and they're
we need to deal with that because in a production system, that's reality. I mean, you have different teams, each of them updating at their own pace, basically. even if they run the same control plane, I mean, you cannot expect everyone to test and I mean, all the teams, all the work in a company to stop it so they can go over the configs and upgrade them.
Okay.
So this deprecation analyzer, is that already existing?
So with 1.7, we do deprecation analysis piece in istioctl analyze that will tell you about any CRs that are going away or that you still have that are gone.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I agree with Jason. I mean, that's pretty much the prepare command.
Yeah, we're saying prepare is just preparing API configs, and that's nothing else we would do. Probably, I don't know if prepare is too broad, or we just to say like something like istioctl convert a config or something.
Yeah. But the critical part of what I'm trying to convey is that it needs to be split into one part that is run by the cluster admin, which may not understand all the namespaces and all the users, and one part that should be targeted toward users. So if the user needs to change something in a namespace, the system admin should not go and make changes to the user configurations, which may be overwritten later by CI/CD. Because in reality, in a namespace, you will have a CI/CD that is pushing the configs. You can have as many istioctl applies as you want or prepare, because later on the CI/CD will push the other version.
Right. So for this, then we have for each release of istioctl, we have a kind of a different logic then.
Yes, probably.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, maybe even something that should work offline, basically, on YAML files that are not in the cluster.
Which
Yeah, like
analyze does today.
Yeah, I know.
Files, right?
So that will be analyze and fix, basically, or fix. Or can analyze print a diff? I don't know.
Sorry, can you say that again, Costin?
Would analyze have an option to display a diff?
Analyze does not currently do that. It's designed to generate a line of information only.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I mean, a separate command is probably reasonable. If we have a need, because if we stop deprecating stuff, then we don't have a need for it, and it's less work. So maybe we should stop.
Yeah, I think in overall, this is a better solution compared to the old kind of version conversion I was proposing. John was strongly opposing my kind of in cluster kind of conversion. So if we do this like prepare in ahead of time, then I think it will probably be a better solution.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's definitely more friendly for CI/CD system people. That's really so.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, we'll take a look into that, and hopefully we can achieve it for 1.8.
Excellent. Shall we move on? So the experimental proxy status is new. In 1.8, it's going to get token support. There's already a PR for that. And it may replace existing proxy status in 1.8. So we'll have to discuss that soon. Exclusively.
Let's discuss it now. I mean, what's hold up?
Okay. Do you think I think it should.
Of course.
Okay.
As long as we get all of the needed authorization steps, so that like I haven't seen your PR, Ed. Is there separate work that's required to acquire the token, or can a user just run Istio control proxy status as they did before?
So with the latest PR, if the user has Kubernetes, it works perfectly. It 100% of the time goes out, acquires the token, which is very fast, and then it uses the token. There's no steps. The only risk would be if you didn't have Kubernetes at all, and in which case you would have to use the certificate thing, or we could come up with something else.
But at the current proxy status doesn't work at all if you don't have Kubernetes.
That's right. Yeah. So
it's not integration.
The current proxy, or the old one doesn't, so we're all set. I think this is going to be great, and so I'll just get rid of the may. It will replace the existing proxy status in one. Token PR is done. We can try to actually make this happen.
Now, one tiny comment I have, since we are going to this direction, and there are some other PRs, I don't know if you saw them, to disable the debug endpoint. Would it make sense, or it will simplify, or would it simplify your life if we moved the debug endpoints to the HTTPS endpoint with JOT authentication, and you can access them through, through the gateway? Does it help? Is there any information in the debugs that you would use in istioctl that is not specific to a particular instance? Because if you go to a gateway and HTTPS, you will, well, actually, no, that's not necessarily true. You can still go to individual istiod over HTTPS with JOT token and access it.
So we do have a few commands that have not been migrated off the debug endpoint. Wait comes to mind.
Those two. So pretty much everything that is right now exposed on the 8080 unsecure port, we can move on the secure port and put JOT authentication on top. And that will remove the main concern about operating it that we have right now.
So let's do, so Mitch, if you could implement the commands that still use the old debug endpoint as quick as possible, and we can get this token in, we can replace the old commands quickly, and that will be wonderful.
Okay. I think long term, we'd still like to see all of this moved over to XDS.
Of course.
But I'm not sure that all of that is necessarily in scope for 1.8. A lot of that depends on how much progress that mostly I can work with you, Costin, on the troubleshooting API, that sort of thing.
So I think the most important is to stop having admin interface over plain text. That's really unauthenticated. That right. Was really the, but of course we still want XDS, but it's kind of, okay, good.
Excellent. So the remove from mesh command, I think we're not going to touch this release. It seems fine with Tariq's fixes, perhaps. The sidecar bootstrap, I don't know well enough, but I hope that the people who wrote it are using it and making sure it is staying healthy and current.
Actually, it's not. I tried it for VM. It's just totally outdated now. It does not create workload entry at all. So I think there's a new istioctl command something istioctl experimental workload entry, something like that, proposed for networking. So that will kind of replace this for VM sidecar bootstrap.
Is there a reason we shouldn't use the same name and flags for this new command?
I don't know, but the sidecar bootstrap basically only creates service entry or service. Well, yeah, I don't know the reason for the naming.
It just seems like if we're accomplishing the same thing, we probably ought to have some consistency for our users there.
I have seen those PRs for workload entry. I have made a few comments on them, but let's try to get them merged and get anything that we don't want out quickly.
Okay.
So we have the uninstall command that is new in 1.7. It seems to work fine. The experimental version, which is just a replacement for the version command with the new communication thing, is fine. We have wait, and I'm going to color that or experimental wait because Mitch is going to fix that. So it does need some work and it is at risk, but I think we're in good shape for that. Okay, well, I will go through this document and create issues to reflect what we've had and try to get this going.
That sounds good. Should we quickly talk about what commands might be good candidates for graduation from experimental? Because I feel like some of these commands have been there for a long time.
That's true. And I think we said that They have to stay until they have an automated integration test and documentation, and sort of people use them or have an owner. Some of these commands have somewhat suffered because we have been too lazy to write integration tests. For things like add to mesh, it's a huge pain to write a test that's loads a pod with no namespace, does add to mesh, waits for it to restart, because there aren't really helpers for all that stuff yet. So tell me, Lynn, which commands you think are worthy, and we can try to focus on getting them tests.
Sorry, add to mesh is for the VMs?
No, add to mesh is just like kube inject.
Ah, I didn't even know it exists.
But works with the services already existing cluster. Actually, I think Austin is asking an interesting question, because we have this bootstrap, sidecar bootstrap, right? And then there's another new command someone just mentioned that's going to replace sidecar bootstrap, but add to mesh is kind of doing stuff similar, except the add to mesh only works for Kubernetes workloads right now.
So what does it do? I'm confused.
So what add to mesh does is it does several things. First, as an argument, it can take a deployment or a service or a pod. It can do what kube inject does, or it can create annotations so that if there's an existing
Oh my God.
thing, yeah. Anyway,
Why?
So why?
Okay, I get it.
The reason for add to mesh is that what I found when I was testing was that I found it was really great to patch my deployments to turn on and off the annotation for injection. And when I did that, it made it really easy to figure out which pods had and supported and did not support Istio. And I gave a requirement for how to write that to some people, and it came back very big and complicated. So it is somewhat complicated, but it can be really nice.
Actually, now that I think about it, I'm starting to become a big fan of it.
That's great.
So could I, for example, so does it use an injector, or does it manually does kube inject? Because so basically, if you pass a deployment or a pod and it reapplies it, that would be a good way to test without putting the label on the namespace.
Yeah, it's awesome if when it works right, which is usually the case. It is so nice. You just run this command and it starts very fast way.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
But how is it different from kube inject?
So with kube inject, you have to apply, and people were getting confused by that.
Oh, so basically that is doing a get, a kube inject, and then apply.
It does a patch, but
A patch.
or sometimes it. Yeah. Anyway, it's
Okay,
nice.
I get it.
yeah, so the nice thing is you don't necessarily need to have the YAML file, right? It fetches automatically from the cluster and then patches
understand.
with the
Yeah,
sidecar proxy.
Yeah, I'm no longer a fan. I mean, it's basically the same argument with CI/CD. I mean, it's a transient state that will be overwritten next time people apply use the CI/CD and reconcile with the CI/CD. That's really
That's right, because it's a
demo as well. So like when talking to users that are just thinking about adopting Istio, like add to mesh makes a good demo where they can just install the the control plane, and then just try out one or two services just by running.
Yeah, but it's a demo of what you should not do in production,
So
basically. So it's kind
you
of
should
Right.
So first off, you should never do it in production. But the way
Exactly.
the way I used it was I would install some application, a microservice application, and then one deployment at a time I would add to mesh and see if it broke, right? Because what I had in the past, I had taken a large YAML file with a bunch of microservices, kube injected. They're all injected. It doesn't work. I don't know why. So I loved taking one deployment at a time and injecting it and finding where it breaks. But
how about adding an option to kube inject live or something?
Well, so the great thing about Add2Mesh is that it doesn't inject a whole file. But anyway,
Okay.
let's not talk about improving that one. Let's see which ones Lynn wants to graduate.
Okay.
So the analyzer, did that already graduate?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I was running a older version of istioctl.
All of these I have thought about graduating and have not graduated because of either lack of documentation, lack of integration testing, or lack of someone other than me who understands and supports it.
And upgrade are certainly important because those are recommended step in our documentation where it's still experimental right now.
I think upgrade is already graduated and uninstall was new in 1.7.
Okay.
I mean, I would also vote for describe. And it's something that I tell users to use it quite often.
Thank you for that vote of confidence. And I think it's also nearly ready as well. The reason that it did not was that although there is integration tests for it, the integration tests maybe don't test every case. But yes, we could try to get it in the main line.
Might be useful is when you do istioctl X, it would remove the graduated commands.
So Shamster is removing all the graduated ones. So if you look at the daily builds in a couple days, all the graduated ones are gone.
Okay, that would be cool. Yeah, because I'm still seeing a bunch of them with 1.7. That's why I was confused at a moment when you said they are all graduated.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah. We have just 8 minutes, and I had planned to talk about organizing admin versus user commands. So I'm not going to discuss that. We'll discuss that next week. I have an issue to do consistent capitalization in the descriptions. I'm looking for volunteers to just do that and get some credit for making some changes to istioctl. I wanted to talk briefly about a PR that I have for duplicate matches and see what people think of it. So this is a new analyzer I wrote yesterday, and I wrote it for 2 reasons. One is I wrote it because this wasn't happening. He had a fault and a mirror, so they don't work together. The reason they aren't working together is he had a minus sign here. So this is 2 rules, both with empty match clause. So the mirror one can never fire. And that Greg figured that out, but I did not notice that at first. We have also related, and my PR doesn't fix, is this user who has shown that Envoy goes stale if you have a match sort of the same in 2 different virtual services. And before I tackle that one, I wanted to tackle the easier one. So before I show you the way these messages look, I should show you the test case that I have and give you an example of what I'm talking about. So although I have examples for HTTP, TCP, and TLS, the basic idea is pretty simple. I have some rules, either the one we just saw with no matches or matches where there's some duplication, the exact same match in both cases, and cases where there's partial duplication. So maybe some of the matches are the same in subsequent rules, but the complete rule has a few new matches. And I wanted to point out some flaws in my approach. So if a match in a subsequent rule is a subset of the match in the first case. My detector doesn't currently detect it. So if you had something like, well, if the port's 8080 and the prefix is this in the first rule, and the second one says if the prefix is that, doesn't mention the subset, it might never hit. I didn't try to get that working. But otherwise, it basically works. And it produces messages that look like this, that either say, warning, this rule is never used, either because all matches were used by prior rules, or only the last rule can have no matches. And it also gives you infos, so less than warnings, if you have matches that are impossible to be reached because they existed on previous rules. So I found these messages to be not the best, but they were the best I could do. I'm going to put a hold on this so that if you can think of some better messages, but the logic is basically straightforward. So if anyone is interested in helping this case out, I think it would be helpful to people to have this analyzer. So next week we will talk about the reorganizing. Also, probably next week, Lynn gave a service mesh con talk recently. Service mesh is still hard with the folks from Linkerd, and I think it would be good for us to see what Lynn and the Linkerd folks think is hard about service mesh. Does anyone have any other items that we want to discuss next week?
I may have a design doc by then. I hope to have a design doc by then to talk about how we are going to handle the, what are we calling it? Aggregation of XDS events across the mesh.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we made a lot of progress this week.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Ed.
Yep. Thank you.